bringing you the future today. This is Resetting Tomorrow. Tales from the frontiers of science, engineering, technology, and telecom.
Hello and welcome to Resetting Tomorrow. I'm your host, Hugo Malan, and today on the show we're thrilled to have SAFe Fellow and Agile evangelist Richard Knaster join us. Richard has over 30 years of experience in software and systems development, ranging from developer to executive, and he's been leading large-scale Agile transformations for more than 15 years. As a SAFe Fellow and methodologist, he's passionate about creating environments where organizations can deliver value, improve quality, and have a bit of fun along the way. He's also the co-author of the SAFe Distilled and SAFe Reference Guide book series, which makes him a leading voice in the Agile community. In this episode, we'll dive into his journey, the evolution of Agile, the challenges faced by large companies, and the vital role of value streams in driving business outcomes. Let's get started. Richard, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Hugo. It's great to be here, and I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Well, can you start by telling us a bit about your background and what led you into the Agile and Lean space?
Yeah, my background is I've been doing software and systems development for over 30 years in roles from developer to executive. And what really got me into Agile when I was working at a bank, and it seemed that all of our projects were late, they weren't on time, they weren't on cost or on scope. And I thought there's got to be a better way of doing things. So I've always had like a scientific approach to work. And so I would experiment and try different things and try to get rid of steps that I didn't need to do. And also change when I predicted we would get the project done to have it more in a more agile way. Back then, there wasn't agile software or development or lean software development. But I think all of us who have been involved in the lean and agile community have realized there were certain common problems that we had. And so I always learned to figure out new ways of doing things. And sometimes it got a bit dicey because auditors would want you to comply with a process as if the process was going to keep you safe, as opposed to let's try some experiments, let's see what works, what doesn't work, and what's the point of being on time and on schedule if what you created that nobody wants. So that's what kind of drove me to being in the lean and agile space. I previously worked for IBM as their chief agile methodologist and for Scaled Agile as a methodologist and a principal consultant where I worked on the development of SAFe, one of the world's most popular frameworks. I've also been authoring books for the past several years as well on lean and agile practices. I like to share my knowledge and give back to the community about what I've learned. So that's what I've been doing for quite some time. And I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah, aren't we all? So you threw out a few words. I think it'd be great if you can explain to our listeners exactly what they mean. I think most folks have heard these, but Agile is one and then SAFe is another. Why don't we start with Agile?
Yeah, so Agile really just means that the way that you think and the way that you do things is done in a more adaptable way. The old ways of doing things was you would gather all the requirements first. Then you would do all the design next. Then you would do all the development work. Then do all the testing work. And finally, you would deploy it into production or in the marketplace. And so that was usually like 6 months to a year before you got anything out the door and gotten feedback. So Agile is about how can we do things in a way which is more adaptable? How can we get faster feedback from our customers so that we're building the right things at the right time?
So in practice, what does an Agile project look like?
Well, it does things in much smaller chunks. So instead of trying to do a project which might take a year or two, we break it down into much smaller efforts. And on a project team, you typically have temporary people who are working on a temporary endeavor. A project has a definite start date and a definite end date. And usually the people who are assigned to the project, once the project is done, people then leave the project and go back to their functional silos. So what happens is that you lose all that learning and knowledge when we disband those people. So Agile keeps stable teams for long periods of time. You don't want to be changing somebody's team composition every project. It's more like you want to keep a whole team together for at least 6 months to a year, if not longer. And that way they work together in a much better fashion. They know each other. They finish each other's sentences. They actually start having fun working together. And we don't want to break that up every few months.
Mm-hmm. And so do they then go through repeated short cycles of discovery and design and development and testing?
Yes, that's the biggest difference. So with an Agile project, even with a 2-week time period, which we call either a sprint or an iteration, they aim to do the design, development, testing, and deployment into a production environment where customers can actually use the software. So instead of waiting 6 months to release, say 30 features, anytime something is ready for release, we want to get into the hands of our customers and to get that feedback from it. Did we build the right thing? And are you finding this useful? What do we need to change? So it's a much more adaptable way and scientific way of doing things instead of just guessing. The future, unfortunately, is unknowable, at least at the moment, until AI can start predicting the future based upon all these patterns. But the future is really unknowable. So the best thing to do is to do things in small chunks, get those small things out to customers' hands, gets feedback, and then make small changes every time you learn something. Let's not try to predict what customers want. Let's show them something what they want. And this is for any kind of product, whether it's software, whether it's a physical device, any kind of product that doesn't involve software, it works for that as well. It's the same thinking works.
That's fascinating. And I imagine it has benefits for the team's morale as well, because they're doing interesting things all the time.
That's correct. Especially when Agile is done right, people are having fun. And when you're not doing Agile right, the morale is really bad and people are not enjoying coming into work every day. And unfortunately, about 66% of the people who are at work are not engaged, cited by the Society for Human Resources Management. That's quite extraordinary to have 65% of your people really just coming to work, not being passionate about what they're doing, and then just leaving for the day and really not having that drive to improve things, to help the company grow, to help people, help their customers. So Agile has really helped many organizations achieve a better way. That's if the leaders are actually following the same things as we're asking the teams to do. And there's often a disconnect to how teams work and how the leaders of the organizations operate. They're often still operating in the old ways of thinking and doing things, and that can be at odds with the people who are actually doing the work.
So what are some of the big challenges that companies experience when they try and move to an agile approach?
Yeah, I think that the biggest problem is the culture and executive sponsorship. And from a cultural standpoint, a lot of the ways that we have been doing things over the past 30 or 40 years have been ingrained within people. It's become part of their DNA. And with Agile, you're doing things in a very different way, almost the opposite of how you would do things in the traditional way. And it's very hard for people to let go of how they used to work because it's been successful for them. They've gotten to where they are in their careers because they've been successful. The other thing is, I also don't think that the Agile community necessarily has adapted to our leaders well enough. In other words, you just can't expect a leader to change on the dime, and you just can't expect a leader to change all the processes within their organization, or even to focus on the amount of time that's required to make some of these changes. And so we need to be more agile in implementing lean and agile practices, which is the funny part. I hear lots of criticisms. Oh, the leaders haven't changed. They're not engaged enough. Well, do they know what you need them to do? Are you coaching them as well? Is this something they really want to do? Or have they really not bought into the change? That's often another big problem, the resistance.
Now, another word you mentioned is SAFe, which I think in this context is an acronym. Can you explain to our listeners what that means?
Yes. So SAFe stands for the Scaled Agile Framework. And what it is, it's both a knowledge base and a library of patterns on how to do work. So if you want to become agile beyond just one team, you need to start scaling agile so that multiple teams can work together, collaborate together, and be able to plan and learn together, inspect and adapt together. And so it contains patterns of how you do work. For example, if multiple teams want to plan together, there's something called PI planning. And in PI planning, multiple teams, let's say you have 10 teams who work together to create a really large solution, they all plan at the same time. And there is a prescribed way of how you do the event and the outcomes that you would like to achieve. But many people forget to realize that it's a framework and it's meant to be adapted to everyone's organization. If you do SAFe exactly by the book, you're not going to be as successful as tailoring the process for your organization, because every organization's strategy is different. Every organization's goals are different. The people are different. Their histories are different. And so you just can't do things in a one size fits all. So you really need experienced coaches and consultants to help the organization through the change and adapt the framework in a way that it will truly work. And you're not doing anything dysfunctional because you don't want to solve a particular problem in your organization.
Got it. But I guess it's safe to say, no pun intended, if a company is intending to embrace Agile, it's good for them to use a framework like SAFe in order to in a structured way, pursue Agile. With your, of course, admonishment that folks should adapt the framework to their particular set of circumstances.
Yes, there's a lot of advantages of adopting SAFe. First of all, you have a common language in the framework. There's standard training that you can use. There are standard ways of doing things. And so everyone can have that same understanding and be on the same page. Sometimes words get in the way. We don't know what they mean. And not being able to go to a common dictionary can be tough. So it can be extraordinarily helpful just in everyone having that common language and common understanding of the basics of how to use the framework. Now, there are some people that would prefer not to have a framework. And those people, often they feel that the framework gets in the way of people's thinking. In other words, they're not thinking for themselves. We'll just do it exactly the way it says in the framework. Just tell me what to do and I'm good. But there are plenty of people who want to figure out things on their own. And there's advantages to that as well. By figuring out it own, you make the process your own. Your people are having to create new ways of thinking and working and doing research and learning on their own. So I think there's merit in both approaches. I don't think there's a right or there's a wrong, but I find that many organizations would not be able to improve without having a framework like SAFe.
Now, speaking of a common dictionary, another term that we hear a lot in this context is value streams. Would you like to explain what that means?
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's so much confusion around value streams and what their purpose are. So a value stream is simply this series of process steps to go from a concept to then when it's the product is delivered to the customer. And there's some types of value streams you're actually creating the product, which we call those development value streams. And there are some value streams that are customer facing, that you're directly interacting with that customer, and that's an operational value stream. So some people in the company directly interact with the customer and sell them things and service them, and other people are developing the products within the company. So those are two different types of value streams, and they're related. What's been the big breakthrough about using value streams outside of manufacturing? They came into being as a result of work done in Toyota, at the Toyota production system, about 50 years ago. And the breakthrough is that we're now using that thinking from the Toyota production system, was meant for manufacturing, and applying it to the software world. So what was interesting, when you work in a manufacturing plant, there's a catwalk above the factory floor, and you can see everything that's going on. If work has stopped, you can see it. If work is piling up and it's not moving, you can see it. So everything is visible. But when you're developing software, none of that is visible. People are either working from home, or when we used to be in person, people were working at a cubicle, and you couldn't see the flow of information and the work product being created because it's on a computer. So what value stream management does, it helps you visualize your process and how things go from start to finish for either developing a new product, or from start to finish for doing a transaction with a customer. For example, an operational value stream might be about creating a consumer loan or selling a consumer loan to a customer. And so there's a series of steps that that customer goes through to, first of all, you got to attract the customer, and then they need to go online and apply for the loan, maybe get some information about the loan, credit check, then the credit check has got to get approved. And there's always so many steps in the process. And a lot of times there's delays in these steps that cause things that take only really, say, 10 minutes to do, but it maybe take 10 weeks to get done because of the delays inherently in the system. So that's why value stream management has become, and mapping has become, so important, because we realize that there are huge opportunities in the delays that we have in our processes. And it's not the heavyweight stuff that was done in the late 80s and early 90s, business process engineering, which tried to go too far, really trying to understand not just the flow of the work, but how things went into a loop, and decisions yes, decisions no. And it became very complex and overly bureaucratic to document your organization in that way. So value stream management is kind of a light way of understanding how things get done in your organization, and how can we improve it? How can we make it faster? Maybe some things can be automated. Perhaps some steps can be eliminated. Do we really need to approve something? Like, do we really need to approve an expense report that's under $1,000? Well, maybe that should just get automatically approved. Instead, it sits in some manager's inbox, and he's got maybe 25 or 50 people to go through, and there's a great delay. It's just sitting idle, and that work is not getting processed. So that's what really makes this exciting, is really thinking about how value flows and making sure that we can become as efficient as possible. But that's only part of the story, to be honest.
Well, I'm curious how you link value streams to Agile. It sounds like value streams is a great way of discovering how to run your business more effectively. Agile is a great way of delivering projects, but how do they come together?
Yeah, in fact, that's the subject of my latest book, The Lean Agile Way. And in that book, I talk about how do you combine lean and agile practices to get the most value from each of those disciplines. And they're really related. Agile is based on many lean processes. So value stream management is part of the lean movement from the Toyota production system and in manufacturing in general between the 50s and the early 2000s. A lot of companies got into that.
Well, I could strongly recommend that our listeners go and read your book, as it sounds like there's some fantastic advice in there for making your company more efficient.
Yeah, and that book was written so that it didn't rely upon any framework. It was framework agnostic, because there's nothing wrong with the people who want to figure it out themselves and those people who want to use a framework. Use the approach that works for you. Experiment and try things. And you have to have that scientist mindset in order to find out what works best.
Can you share a story of a company that applied value streams and saw a major impact?
Yeah, there have been many companies that have experienced such gains. I particularly find that banks can achieve enormous gains in efficiency and value development. So one of the things that I was going to mention before was that value stream management isn't just about efficiency. It's also about focusing on value, meaning we often work on things that don't move the needle in the business. And this is one of the cases where this organization got very good at developing features for the financial markets, and they can move really fast after implementing Agile. Probably got a 20 to 30% increase in productivity, and were able to increase customer delight by over 40%. Their mobile experience wasn't good. Their website, their online banking wasn't so great. So they really made a big difference by implementing technology to interact with the customer, but also bringing in technology to help the people who develop the products work better, so that things they can collaborate together. They can merge their work or integrate their work to make sure that it's working. But then the next phase was, well, we're moving really fast and we're becoming a feature factory. So we would knock out these features, but they're not moving the needle in the business. So if you're creating lots of stuff, that doesn't really matter. If that stuff doesn't actually help improve the business, if it doesn't help customers enjoy using your products and services, and the fact that you're meeting the needs. So that's another big part of Lean, is delivering the most amount of value to the customer in the shortest sustainable lead time. And they also had a great increase in their value delivery percent, and that was done within 2 years.
Those are big numbers.
Yes, indeed.
And what's the most counterintuitive thing that you've seen from applying value streams?
Yeah, I think the most counterintuitive things is, and Kanban is a system that's used in value streams to track work. And often leaders think that the more work that we start, that the more work we'll finish. And so at least if we get started on something, well, doesn't it make sense if we started it, we'll finish sooner? And so that's an aspect which is incorrect. So the more work in process that you have, and you can see things get bottlenecked up in the value stream where work is just sitting idle in a certain state, waiting to be moved to the next state. And so value streams helps you see that the more work you start does not result in more work being finished. So the lean mantra is actually stop starting and start finishing. So to be focused and to be working together as a team to get stuff done. And typically people, especially developers, they like working on their own in many cases. Not everyone, developers are often shy people, and that goes for testers as well, who I also consider developers or business analysts. So they all want to start their own work. And basically what happens is nothing gets done after the time box, which we typically work in time boxes of about 2 weeks.
That's a great mantra. Should all embrace that. Stop starting and start finishing.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, taking it up one more level, I believe there's also a concept called lean portfolio management for approving and managing IT projects. Can you speak about this a little bit?
Sure. In fact, that's one of my favorite subjects is lean portfolio management. And I had the honor of creating a lot of the content and the course for lean portfolio management when I worked at Scaled Agile. And what I loved about it was it turned a lot of things upside down. So as an example, when you are getting a project approved, one of the things that you have to do is come up with a budget for the project And then you've got to create a business case to get that project started. And by the time you've done that, anywhere between 6 months and 18 months have gone by. And even if you get that business case approved, have you proven the assumptions for that work? And many times our assumptions are wrong because the future is unknowable. So instead of making such a big investment, then having to do so much research to prove the investment will work, and reality is just fiction that you're writing because of the fact that the future is being unknowable. So why not just get started with something small? Say, how much money are you willing to make in this investment, this product or service? And then let's see how that goes. Let's do an experiment to create some kind of functionality that we can test and get feedback from customers if that's going to actually move the needle in the business. So now you're going from let's pick the best project ideas to having a strategy of where you want to be, and then creating experiments to see what are the investments that we should be making, where are we going to actually get traction. And strategy, which is another one of my favorite things, is also can be emergent. Not everything is known up front. So you also have to do experimentation. And often, as you're experimenting, things totally new have come up. And there's something called a pivot. So you might have heard of YouTube. And actually, YouTube started out as a dating site. And they had made some investment in that functionality. And the dating part didn't get much traction. But what people loved was watching people create the videos and the videos that they've uploaded, whether it's silly dog things or other pets, just being with family, telling jokes or whatever it might be. The content really took off well. So YouTube decided to pivot from being a dating site to being a streaming service, and the rest is history. You understand what has happened with that company. It just has taken off and purchased by Google, and it's worth millions and millions of dollars. And that's because they used the thinking of lean portfolio management, which was, if what we're doing is not working, well, let's try a different experiment. Or if something is working, let's double down on that and see if we can make a go with this new ideas.
That's great. So, as someone so close to all these concepts, Agile in particular, what do you think is next?
What I think is next? Well, unfortunately, many organizations have not achieved the benefits of lean and agile for many different reasons. So I think what is going to happen next is that companies need to identify specific problems that they want to solve in their organization. For example, maybe it's we want to go faster, or we want to provide more customer value. We want to develop new products faster. What is the core thing that they're trying to fix? And I think they need to then use their strategy and see how do those things align with our strategy. If they're not aligned with our strategy, should we be really doing that? Because otherwise we're not going to achieve the benefits. If the whole company isn't rowing in the same direction, then we're going to be in effect fighting each other, and we're not going to achieve our goals. So I think more emphasis on business strategy, and I haven't seen one yet in almost 30 years of my working in this field. Yes, there are some companies that have strategies, but not many of them. And the other thing is going after specific problems that they're having in the organization and then trying to make those processes more adaptable and more efficient instead of doing these big implementations where we're going to just try to transform the entire organization to lean and agile. They're going to start using the concepts of lean and agile and doing things in much smaller bites and trying to address specific problems. So I think value stream management is going to be a big part of that. And I think lean portfolio management is going to be a big part of that. And I really consider lean portfolio management to be a subset of value streams, because in lean portfolio management, it's a portfolio of value streams that you're managing and the solutions that they develop or sell.
Okay. Before we conclude this fascinating conversation, we normally end with a rapid fire question round.
Okay,
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
How are you personally using AI in your daily life?
I use it every day. I do a lot of writing. I've authored 6 books, and it helps me. Sometimes I get stuck, for a word, or I said something too complicated, so I'll use AI for that. I'll use it for research, and especially the kinds of AI that also provide citations, so I can make sure what it's telling me that makes sense to come up with new ideas. I've become a prompt artist, believe it or not. So I put in a prompt, I said, create a painting of children playing in a field using an impressionist style. And in 2 minutes, that's come out. And I really enjoy art. And since I'm not as artistic with my hands as I am my mind, it's been, quite a fun thing to do, to try to create different paintings and posters and hang them in my house and have something that's unique.
Do you use Agile in your daily life?
Yes, I do. And when I work on something, and let's say that I'm doing a workshop for a customer or we're trying to solve some kind of problem, I like to show them what I'm thinking of as early as possible. So I get that fast feedback from them, and then I can make adjustments to that work to make sure what I'm going to be delivering them is actually going to deliver value. The worst thing I can do as a consultant is to work on something and then I don't get results. I just don't feel good about myself if that happens. So I don't let that happen by taking an agile approach and adapting something so that we can continually improve it. And so it provides the most value to that customer.
Have you come across any cool innovations or up-and-coming companies or people that you think are really going to change the future?
Yes, I have. I'm working with one right now, and they're an AI company, and they map value streams automatically using AI. And their name is Tech Veris. So I'm finding that I can use that tool to help take the tedious work out of doing value stream mapping, where the AI can mostly figure it out. And then from there, you use that as a way to prompt you to say, okay, is that a process? No, let's remove that step. Oh, we're missing this step. So I think that's really helpful. But I think AI itself is going to be a completely new revolution. So we've had 5 industrial revolutions so far. We're in the age of digital and software, but I now think we're in the age of artificial intelligence and machine learning. But I don't really necessarily consider it to be necessarily artificial intelligence. To me, I think it's augmented intelligence, because the software doesn't really have any innate intelligence. It's able to spot patterns and answer things by using the machine learning. It's not thinking like us humans do. And the more that we can have AI do the tedious work for us so that we can focus on what we do best as humans, is the creativity that we have and how we're also be able to connect the dots on something that a machine might have a hard time doing.
When you face challenges, what keeps you motivated and pushing forward?
What keeps me motivated is helping people. I hate to go into companies and see that the morale is just terrible and people aren't enjoying coming to work. So one of the things that my dad mentioned to me when I was a kid, I've never forgotten, and it's a Mark Twain quote. And it says, find a job that you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. And I enjoy working every day. I can't wait to get up in the morning and start my day and doing things, because I love what I do and I love helping others, maybe grow in their career or help their company be more effective, being able to be more creative. So that's what gets me going, is especially when I can see how a company transformed from being a very unpleasant place to work to now being a fun place to work, where people have that same feeling. I just can't wait to get in here and do some really cool stuff.
Now, you mentioned the art with AI. How else do you unwind and take care of your mental health?
Yeah. So I do a lot of walking. I walk about 4 miles a day, and I also exercise 4 days a week. And that's how I keep my mind sharp. I love reading. Reading is another big thing that I do, and listen to podcasts like yours and audiobooks. That's how I typically unwind. And I love documentaries and history. I find it fascinating. I didn't find it as fascinating as a kid, but I bet if they played the videos that they have on YouTube in school, it would have been a much different circumstance, because it's just fascinating, the history of our country and the history of the world. It's just amazing.
Do you have a favorite documentary of all time that you can recommend?
That's a really hard one. Since I'm a strategist, I like watching a lot of the World War II videos, especially when they talk about how they were attacked by the enemy and overcame it, or how they, overcame enormous odds with a very small army and was able to beat the other group. So I'm not a fan of war. I hate war. I know war is hell, but there's a lot to be learned from the military in terms of strategy. That's where strategy came from, was from the military. So I like watching documentaries on that, because I just find that part fascinating, how people win. And that's what business is all about as well, is winning. You don't get participation trophies at your company. And that's, a lot of companies are just playing to play, and they're not playing to win.
Okay, final question, toughest one of all. Would you rather be able to control the weather or communicate with animals?
I think I would rather be able to communicate with animals. It's kind of cool that you don't know what the weather's going to be in the next day, but I'm always wondering what animals are thinking. I have a dog. I've had it for 2.5 years, my first dog. And prior to that, we had 5 cats. And I just find their behavior absolutely astounding. And I also like watching documentaries on gorillas, and David Attenborough's work is quite amazing. So being able to know what's on their mind would be really, really interesting. I can't think of anything more interesting than that.
Might be a little scary. I've heard people say when cats look at us, they're thinking, you look delicious.
It very well could be.
Well, Richard, thank you again for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Hugo. I really enjoyed it too. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
It's a pleasure. That wraps up our conversation with Richard Knaster. A big thank you to Richard for sharing his insights and experience in the agile and lean space. It's clear that as organizations navigate the complexities of large-scale software development, understanding agile and value streams and fostering the right culture can make all the difference. And if you're ready to bring lean agile principles into action and empower your team, don't miss the chance to book a Lean Agile Way enablement session with Richard. Head over to his LinkedIn profile to secure your spot and start transforming your approach today. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who might find it valuable. And remember, if you're in need of expert talent or are looking for new opportunities yourself, be sure to visit us on the web at resettingtomorrow.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep resetting tomorrow. This is Hugo Malan signing off.
This podcast was produced in partnership with Amaze Media Labs.